And let's mark this on the calendar. This time the weatherman got it right. Okay? It's kind of a first this year because it seems like whenever they predict the big storms, it doesn't happen. And then on Thursday, nobody predicted it, but boy, was that a mess. Anybody go driving on that day? I drove home from Algona, and I was driving on 169 20 miles an hour sometimes. And there were trucks and cars in the ditch all the way from Algona all the way down to Fort Dodge. So it looks like I drove back this morning or last night. It looks like they're all cleared out, so that's a good thing. Hopefully nobody got hurt. So we've got a new series that we're starting today. And no, I don't have a video for you, but in the coming weeks I will again. And this is a series that really for me started back last fall. And I don't know if some of you remember, but I put a question box out in the back, and I said, put your questions in. And then you didn't hear anything more about it, right? Well, here it is now. I've kept those questions, and I'm going to make an attempt to answer some of those questions over the course of the next 3 weeks. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about the why question. Why do these things happen to me? But I want to tell you about next week first, because this is an experiment. I talked to Dr. Anna Johnson. Anna is a professor of church history and also a daughter of the congregation here. She's going to be here next weekend. And so I said, Anna, you want to try something fun? So we're going to put a table up here, and we're going to sit on a couple of chairs. We'll probably have a screen behind us, and we're going to have a question box back there. I'm not going to prepare a sermon. You guys are going to write the sermon for us. And you can put questions in the box, or you can take out your cell phones and you can type a question in and it'll pop up on the screen. Okay? And yeah, so you'll even have the pastor's permission to use your cell phones during church on that day. All right? And then for the 25 minutes, we'll just set a time limit. We'll get to as many questions as possible. The questions that are on paper will also go up on the screen. And that gets saved on this really cool app called Padlet. And so I will keep those questions, and what we don't get to, I will try to answer on Padlet or in other ways. And by the way, you can put your name on if you want to. It could be all completely anonymous. So it's really going to be fun. I have no idea how it's going to go. The sermon might be a complete flop. That's all right. We give it a try. If it doesn't work, we never do it again. And if you like it, we try it again in the future sometime. So for the next 3 weeks, we're going to be taking on questions and answers, and the things that you folks have asked in that question box, and also things. Some of those questions that you put in the question box get reinforced every time I make a pastoral call, and that's what this particular question is today. So I want to start just by telling a little story. We have a swimming pool in our backyard, which means that all of our children, and now all of our grandchildren, are fish. They love to swim, and they learned in our backyard. And I remember when the first grandchild came along. Her name is Marie. She's now 5. But when she was just walking, we had her in the pool before she was walking. But when she was just getting to the point where it was sort of okay to get in the pool with people, so I would sit in the pool, or I'd stand in the pool in the shallow end, and I would get her to jump into my arms and let her splash down in the pool. And we did this over and over and over again. And she absolutely loved it. So she got so that as soon as she got in my arms, I'd have to slap her over to the ladder so she could get back up and do it again. Boom, just like this, over and over and over again. And it was great because she associated the water with a relationship. And she felt safe. And it was great until I got distracted for just a moment. Turned away, boom, into the water she goes. There's no hands to grab her. There's no safety net. There's nothing. Now, she was not in any danger because I was right there, and I heard her splash in the water. Quick, turned around and grabbed her. But when she hit the water, she didn't know she was not in danger. And it took a long time to get that trust back. A long time. Made sure, do I have your eyes, Papa? Okay, come on in, Marie. And you know, I tell this story because I think that's very often the experience that we have when things go wrong in our lives. Certainly I heard that in the question box, and certainly very often I'll make a hospital call, or someone will want to set an appointment with me because they want to tell me about something that's going on in their lives. And it feels sometimes like God got distracted because you're lost and you're alone, and you jumped in expecting someone to catch you, and it didn't happen. And of course, when that does happen, that leads to answers to some of those questions. So I'd like to put a few of those answers that you might have to rest. And the first answer that I often hear is this. I want to set it straight right now. God did not create the world as it is with suffering. He did not create that part of the world. He created the world, to be sure, but he did not create the world to include suffering. It was never his intention for the world to turn out the way it did. Genesis chapter 1. It's a lesson that we have been over a couple of times here already, but let's do it again. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth is without form and void, and darkness is upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God is moving over the face of the water. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was, can you say it with me? The light was good. That's right. And then he separates the day from the night, the light from the darkness. And when he sees that, he says, "It is." And then he separates the dry land from the seas, right? Chaos from the solid ground. And when he's done with that, he says, "It is." And then he creates the plants and the animals, and it is. And he creates humans, and it is. No. It's, gotcha. It's very good. Okay? Which, Genesis code language, good is not just it's okay, it's right, it looks nice. That's code language for this is perfect. This is the way I intended the world to be. Okay? And in that world, we live in perfect harmony with God. We walk in a garden that he created for us. He provides for us. He protects us, and we trust in that provision. God created the world so that there would never be any separation from him, that there would be no suffering, that there would be no trials, that there would be no temptation, that there would be no sickness, and that there would be no death. It would never exist because God did not create it. That is not the world that you experience now, is not the world that God created. Let's be clear about that. Sin comes into the world, and we take matters into our own hands. And as I said in Bible class here a couple of weeks ago, what we did essentially was said, you know, God, we don't really need you here. We can handle this ourselves. And as soon as we start handling things, the wheels start falling off. And that's when all of these things that you now experience when you call me and set an appointment to come into my office, that's where all of those things come from. Not from the world that God created, but from the sin that has come our way. It's the world really we created, right? Hatred is here, animosity, separation from each other, suspicion, party spirit, sickness is here, death is here, trial is here, all the ways you feel lost and alone. I mean, if you were with God, you would never feel lost, and you would never feel alone. But sin has come, and that sin has created a great divide between you and the one who made you, and the one who created you, and the one who loved you. So let's be perfectly clear. The world in which you live is not the world that God creates. Let me also be clear about this. Whatever it is that you're experiencing, that you're suffering, that is not a punishment. It is not a punishment. So you say, well, what about Genesis chapter 3? Towards the end, God deals out punishments. No, not really. What happens is, because, he says to Adam and Eve, because you have done this, this is what's going to happen. See, it's not God throwing down a lightning bolt and saying, okay, now Adam, you're going to work till the day you die, and Eve, you're going to have pain in childbirth, you're going to have envy. That's not God throwing down a lightning bolt. That's God simply saying that this is the path that you've chosen. You've chosen to live apart from me, and that's the cause, and now you have the effect. That's the if, here's the then. This is what happens when you live on your own, when you are separated from me. It's not God punishing you for something you did or you didn't do. That's not why you're suffering. We're suffering because we live in a world of sin. Here's another one. Put this one away definitely. Do not let anyone tell you that this is the will of God, because it simply is not the case. God is not a game player. He did not devise the world as an obstacle course. That is not how he works. This is a God of love, a God who cares deeply about each and every one of you. In fact, it says, Jesus says in the Gospel of Matthew, he says, he even has the hairs on your head counted. That's how obsessed he is with you. Would someone that loves you that much play games with you? Set up obstacle courses? Do something that causes you suffering and call it his will? Would that happen? Consider that for just a moment. No, absolutely not. This is a God that when you suffer, he suffers. And when you are crying, he sheds tears as well. That is our God. Let's keep that one straight. Let's sing for a minute. So Tatum just read a lesson from the 2 Corinthians. It's something that St. Paul wrote. And it says in there that we have this treasure in earthen vessels so that we might know, that all might know, that the transcendent power belongs to God and not to us. And then Paul goes on to say that we're afflicted in every way, but we are not oppressed. We are put down, but we are not defeated, because we always carry within us the death and resurrection of Jesus. Read down a little further and it gets even more interesting, because Paul talks about eternity. And he says, these slight momentary afflictions, this thing called suffering that is such a part of our lives, it's just for a moment. And it prepares us for an eternity with God. So a couple weeks ago, I was listening to a sermon from Lutheran Church of Hope, and Mike Householder just absolutely nailed some things on the head, and I want to share one of those things with you. And so what Mike did was he talks about a timeline of history, okay? And so if you were to take a string, and you could just extend it out, and let's just say that string, this much of that string is your life, okay? It's not very big. It seems big to us, but this much of that string is your life. And everything from here on back is what we call history. It's what has happened. And everything that's before your birth, from your birth on, now you got your birth, your death, right? This is you right here. String goes all the way back. And then everything out is the future. And what Mike says about that, and he's absolutely right, is it goes out that window, down the street, all the way around Algona, and back here, connected again to the end. It is never ending. It is forever. And this is you right here. This is your life. And it puts so many things in perspective when you think about an eternity. Because that eternity doesn't end with your death. It begins with your death. And you are a part of that. And everything that you are goes on for an eternity with God. It sets this into perspective. So let's say, for instance, this is your life. And let's say that you have made a gadzillion dollars. And that you have cured the world of cancer. And that you have done all these benevolent things. And you've brought the world together in a spirit of peace. That's it. Right there. It's kind of small in the end. It looks big because it's your life. And it looks like it'll extend on forever and ever. And then you experience failure. And it's your life. And it's that small. And then you experience suffering. And it's your entire life. And it looks big and it looks important. It looks like your existence is ruined. But think about it in the context of eternity. And it seems so small. So what that means for us as Christians is that what happens here and how God uses that becomes a way to point to bigger and grander things. So I was thinking about this. I was remembering it was 2009, I believe, and it was the last days of the life of Pope John Paul II. And I don't know if you all remember that or not, when he died. But before he died, he'd gotten very sick. He had Parkinson's. And he was really to the point of being incapacitated. He could no longer perform his duties. And, there were all kinds of news articles. There were reports out there. There were folks in the Vatican. And there were all these speculations about and really suggestions that maybe he should resign and step aside. Because, the ship didn't have a leader, didn't have a captain. He was incapacitated. And John Paul II said no. He said, Jesus didn't come down from the cross. And I'm your spiritual leader. And how I die is at least as important as how I live. And so he understood what was going on. He understood that his life was not his successes and failures. It was not ascending to the position of pope. And by the way, this was one of the greatest popes that ever lived. He was one of 4 people during that time period that worked together to bring down the Berlin Wall, the Iron Curtain. One of 4 people. He changed the world during his lifetime. But I think his greatest moment was deciding not to resign. Because I don't know if you remember this or not, but the whole world watched and the whole world waited. And we cried with our Catholic brothers and sisters. And we were drawn in to something much larger than ourselves and much larger than the universal Christian church and much larger than the life of its leader. We were drawn into the belief that it doesn't stop here, but it goes on for eternity. He taught us how to die. God used him to teach us that so that we could learn better how to live. Every time I walk into a hospital room and someone is in their last days, I gather the family around and I say to them, she hears every word I know she's not talking to you, but she hears every word. Tell her what you need to tell her. And you know, simply the suggestion of that brings tears. And so they go over and they whisper in her ear. And I don't know exactly what they're whispering, but if they're really telling her what they need to tell her, they're going to tell her all the ways that she failed them. They're going to talk to her about the ways that she didn't really love them the way they needed to be loved. They're going to say, I love you. They're going to say, all is forgiven. They're going to say, please forgive me. See, God didn't create that moment, that last moment when this person is dying. But God uses that moment for bigger things. Because without that suffering, without that hospital bed, without that person who is there breathing their last, none of those things get shared. None of those things get said. These present sufferings are so small, St. Paul says, and they prepare us for an eternity with eternal things. Think about all the ways that your life is not right. With your spouse, with your children, with your health, with your family, with your friends, with your coworkers, with your job. And recognize that God is there in the midst of those things. He's not just over it, he's in it. And he is there to use those moments, as well as the joyous moments and the good moments, but to use those moments as a preparation for all the eternal gifts and blessings that he would lay at your feet. Let's sing. So Marie jumps into my arms, gets back on the ladder, does it again, over and over and over again, and then I get distracted. God does not get distracted. Never. He sees your suffering. And when you hurt, he hurts. And when you cry, he cries. I know that when I missed her that one time, I was afraid with her. I was fearful with her, even though I knew she was safe. And I cried with her as well. See, God isn't just over the top. He's here with us. And this is the one last big piece. It's not the Father in heaven, not just the Father in heaven, but the Father who has a Son. And the Son becomes a flesh and blood human being to live our life, to suffer as we suffer, to die as we die, and then to take us and provide a door and an entrance to an eternity that is meant for you. Whatever it is that you're facing now, remember exactly what it is. Keep it in perspective. For God has plans, and God loves you, and God cares for you, and God will never, ever let you go. Amen.